Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Curator Frazier, for those comments and remarks. I want to particularly thank this morning Curators Cairns, Walker, and Walsworth, who are now in your overtime period, so thank you for being here this morning. This morning, I plan to take a bit more time than my normal report of the university. And we're also doing this, as Curator Frazier said, with live video streaming in order to effectively reach faculty, students, staff, and alumni, all of our supporters, as a way of ensuring that we have a chance to broadly talk about our university to all of our key constituents. We'll obviously be sure that copies of the charts this morning, as well as my comments, are made available. And we'll appreciate your feedback by email. Last couple of weeks have been a pretty busy time in that regard, and we appreciate your interest and enthusiasm about the university. We put a suggestion system in place in early December, and since that time we've had over 1,800 responses from faculty, staff, and students about how we're progressing as a university and ideas that we can undertake in that regard. So I would call that high engagement. Let me start my comments this morning by thanking the curators for giving me this opportunity now almost a year ago. I'm thankful to all in the university that have been patient with me, have certainly provided wisdom and support, sometimes translation and interpretation. I wondered a few days ago how many times David Russell and Nikki Crowitz have been in their offices getting phone calls saying, well, here's what we think he really meant to say, and providing some of that necessary translation as I've made this transition to this great university. I want to especially thank the faculty this morning. I trust I've displayed adequate curiosity and engagement to be able to progress with you to the next round. So I'll look forward to doing that and hopefully becoming a better listener along the way as we do that. And finally, being a wise person as I am with Valentine's Day just around the corner, it would be smart for me to thank Sherry this morning for her being such an incredibly supportive partner in this past year. So thank you, Sherry. You know, as I comment frequently as I've been in this role, that seeing the university from the inside out, you really do get an entirely different perspective of the depth, the breadth of our mission, delivering on teaching, on service, on economic development, and on research. Every day I learn more, I find out more to be proud of and more to brag about as I become even more confident about what we can do in higher education, to be sure that we're helping lead our state and, in fact, lead our nation through this very difficult and, in fact, unsettling time. So as I come up on my one-year mark, and as we now are well into 2009, and this morning, this gives me a chance to look back a bit, but importantly, to be sure that we look forward. My view is now is the time for America's colleges and universities to come forward, to step up with new ideas and solutions, and do that in a way that reinforces and takes to a new level our ability to be great cooperators, great collaborators, and do that in a way that also benefits our state and the young men and women that rely on us to prepare them for the future. As I came on board, it didn't take too long for my listening and learning sessions to produce the inevitable go-do list, and certainly many key themes emerged from that. Reinforcing the unique missions of our campuses was very important to do. Emphasizing a tone that education has to be viewed as a great investment, ensuring at the same time that we're accessible and affordable for students in our state, and also being sure that we step up our level and transparency in regards to accountability. There were key activities that we wanted to accomplish, several of which became part of my commitment to the curators. I won't speak to each point, but certainly I'm most pleased about the establishment of our Health Science Center here in Columbia, the focus that we've had on economic development, and the role that frequent, candid communication plays in these challenging times. As we think about the specific highlights for last year, certainly there are many, and when you think about the individual accomplishments of faculty and staff, again, it's a list to truly be proud of. The For All We Call Mizzou campaign last year, hitting $1 billion as one of only 18 public institutions, is just an incredible achievement. We put safety for our students, faculty, and staff as a top priority, and will continue to do that. When you think about by the numbers what this university means to our state, I want you to be impressed with the scope and scale of the impact that we have on the state of Missouri. It is quite an impact. But I also want you to begin to shift that discussion as to how that scale and scope can be leveraged to help our state in this challenging time. How this scale and scope and our know-how can be leveraged for the benefit of our colleagues in support of higher education and education in general. In my view, an opportunity and time that we simply can't pass up. We spent a little bit of time on the budget yesterday, the 2009-2010 challenges, so I'm not going to dwell on that much this morning, except to say that now some 18 months ago, we certainly saw the worst recession in 80 years starting to unfold in our country. At the same time, we know that all of those impacts are just now starting to work their way toward us, not here just yet. For sure, we know that that's going to create challenges as those historic reference points, that dashboard, if you will, the dials are spinning, looking for that stable point where we can move forward. Questions, I think, will continue to abound. Affordability and access for students, pressures on tuition. At the same time, we know that state and national graduation rates will peak beginning in 2010. We've had tremendous growth in externally funded research. The question will be, how will times change with the new administration? And will that administration move in different directions, and how will we respond and match up to that as we go forward? We've had such tremendous support from alumni, from our friends and partners that have stepped up in the past to support our university. We know that market impact will make pressures on that front. How that will impact us and how we'll move forward, again, yet is to be seen. And finally, support from the state, roughly 58% in 2001, 38% this year. Not unique, certainly, around the country in terms of that drop in that type of support. But I think there's recognition and desire from our state to provide support for higher education. And the question is, where will that money come from? Where will that money come from, even with that desire? So those pressures are there, and I think that puts a very high premium, as we talked about yesterday, on planning, and be sure that there's high attention to the slightest change in those dimensions that support our university. While the desire to support, I think, is there and very apparent, and I think that's generally true around the state, it is a very complicated equation, a very complicated equation. We have multiple funding sources, we've had enrollment growth, and the results question the efficiency the university has maintained during that period of time. I can't tell you, and many in this room would understand it when I say that, how much time I've spent in the past year trying to understand these reference points for the university and how we're doing in that regard. So what do we know? We know that tuition is up 73% since 2001. We know that state funding is down 35% in that same period, and we know that enrollment growth is up 8,000. But I bet you didn't know that our productivity, depending on the measure that's used, ranges from 14% to 23%. Bet you didn't know that. So very impressive from my perspective on productivity, but not easy to understand and certainly not easy to tell that story. But we now are armed with a great story to tell and with lots of facts, and we certainly are engaged with our state officials. You know, and Curator Frazier just referenced the agreement with the governor, that if it were to hold up, I believe would in fact be a landmark case nationally. Caring for Missourians is our role in ensuring that we have trusted health care and that we're providing health care professionals as our role within the state in that regard. We must secure a recurring capital program mechanism. Certainly last week's news was disappointing but not surprising. We now have to turn our attention and pursue all avenues to ensure that there is a new solution. The wild card in this period will be the federal stimulus plan. I understand it did not pass the Senate last night, but certainly now, as we think about the opportunity for our state and for our country to have funds available to us at a critical moment is something that we have to be prepared for and be very aggressive about in regards to higher education. Let me say here a word about extension. I am personally engaged with the Chancellor, with the Provost, and with the Vice Provost for Extension to understand precisely the types of services that would be impacted by a 50% cut in state funding. I'm meeting this afternoon with the State Extension Council to be sure we have a chance to air out and discuss this matter. But I think at the same time we have to come to grips with the juxtaposition of this incredible record that Extension's had in serving our state, in providing service delivery and research, and the important role that plays truly in a statewide effort, juxtaposed against the budget challenges that we have, and juxtaposed now with this perspective that for whatever reason has caused the action to be taken last week. This will be hard work, but work that in fact must be done and that we have to undertake. As this agenda has been set, and I think this aspirational role that we in higher education have a chance to stake out, and our role in the state's economic recovery, I think it's in the context of a very important factual backdrop, which ought to lead us to ask some very important questions. How are we doing? How are we doing in higher education, education in general, in supporting our state? How are we competing? How are we competing globally? How are we competing nationally? And how are we allowing our companies in our state to attract and retain the best talent? What are our prospects for the future? As we think about the pipeline for students coming toward us, how do we see that and what can we do about that? And importantly, when you put those facts in context, what are actions that we need to take to be sure that we're supportive of our state, again, during this particular time? With this chart, you know that we conducted a survey last fall. That information is now public, and there's viewed as very positive about higher education in general by Missourians, particularly when you couple higher education support for healthcare and support for job creation and economic development. Also, you know that the facts are very clear that earning power and numerous other societal benefits, including lower healthcare costs over someone's lifetime, are directly tied to education level. We know those facts to be true. Mike Nitzel, president of Missouri State University, did a very good job a couple weeks ago at a Missouri State Senate forum, laying out those facts and making a compelling case about investment in higher education and how the state of Missouri can benefit by that focus. Now let me start to suggest to you, though, that the picture gets a bit cloudy when you start to dive into some of the details about education in general in our state. Specifically, when you look at a per county map of our state, and when you look at the age group of 25 to 34-year-olds that have been to college, you start to see a pretty disturbing picture. Nationally, this suggests that the national average is 27.5% of individuals in this age group that have college degrees. And you see in the state of Missouri, we have some counties, particularly in our most dense populated areas, that reach that threshold, but many counties, particularly in the outstate and rural areas, that do not have that perspective and do not have that benefit. So think what that means. It means that the role models, in terms of higher education, the importance potentially can lag behind. It means that the next generation of children that are coming into education in general, again, don't have that type of perspective. In my view, this is a very troubling fact, and certainly one that, as you think about the broader implications for the future of Missouri, is something that needs to be grappled with. And perhaps, again, a very disturbing trend in that regard is when you look at 5-year trend of enrollment rates toward public higher education, you see the state of Missouri, again, lagging behind. Only 5% increase in attendance at higher education institutions, which puts us in the bottom 30% of all states in that regard, and behind most of our neighboring states in that particular measure. I think another very important measure of that perspective is a study that the Kauffman Foundation created last year that talked about a new economy index across a number of economic transformational indicators: knowledge jobs, globalization, economic dynamism, digital transformation, and technological innovation. So how do we do against those measures of potential job creation in the future? And you can see a set of measures that, again, should send off some alarms as it relates to our state. So I must tell you, as a lifelong Missourian and having lived in the Four Corners and both of our major metropolitan areas, this data should represent to all of us a renewed call to action, one that should cause us in this most challenging of time to ensure that we can help our state face up to these facts and take them on, in fact, take them head on. So with that in mind, I want to close by putting a finer point on our strategic directions document, a document that we shared with you last fall that, again, provides for our campuses and for our system perspectives about the things that are going to be important for the future. And I'd like for us to focus this morning on 5 areas that I intend to have us take up in the regard to our response to some of these challenges that have been laid out for us and for our state based on that background and set of facts. So I'm going to go through these point by point, and again, 5 actions for what we should be considering a level of shared engagement. First point is, how are we competing? And I think we tend to take a look at how prepared students are when they come toward us. We talk about remediation programs that sometimes are required in higher education to be sure that we can move kids forward once they get to us. But I think one of the questions is, how often do we look at those that are getting our services as graduates leave us, and how well a job we have done preparing them for the future? So what I'm suggesting here is that we take a look from the outside in, that we review the needs of the Missouri's 25 largest employers to be sure that we're matching up to the needs that they see for the future, that we become an integral part of their strategic planning for the future. I want a task force to be established. I want recommendations by me to December 1st that we can ensure that we're meeting the needs of Missouri's employers and stepping up to that as part of our future planning and, in fact, curriculum development as required. Lots of areas of demonstrated success, and again, I want to be sure that you know, as we look for benchmark and best practices, we've got a lot of that underway on our campuses. 2 examples. At Missouri S&T, we've had a program with GE Aviation that was a competitive program that matched up the needs of GE amongst 300 universities that competed for that support, and now is a best practice in that regard. KC SourceLink is a program at UMKC that matches up needs of small businesses to be sure that we're understanding what their needs are, and this has received a Commerce Department Economic Development Award. So again, lots of examples of best practice. I want to be sure that we turn and pivot on the needs of our businesses in this state to be sure that we can project with them what the needs are for the future. The second issue in that regard, and it talks about the pipeline. It talks about where we are on those demographic charts, how we're doing in students that aspire to go to college. There's been a very significant effort in the state for the last several years called the P20 Initiative, and a number of activities and actions have come out of that. I want to step that up. I think we have to take on those set of facts that we looked at, and it should be one of our biggest concerns about how we can move that pipeline, that 5% threshold of students that aspire to go to college. And we know that nationally those numbers continue to lag behind. So what I want to see are actions that we can take. We left the last P20 initiative without the kinds of things that would show up on my dashboard, the things that ought to be accountable from a board perspective and from my perspective as well as a chancellor. So I want to take that again to another level. I want us to find those things that are working. I want us to find things that can improve that pipeline, provide leverage points, certainly within the University of Missouri, but leverage points across higher education. Again, I intend to appoint a task force and have specific recommendations in hand by the 1st of December. Again, we've got great examples of things that are working, and I want to highlight a couple of those. The first is a Missouri College Advising Corps, which is on the MU campus. One of a handful of institutions that received a $1 million grant to place recent college graduates in underserved communities. These graduates work full-time to increase college preparedness and enrollment across our state. I'd like to share with you a quote from one of our graduates currently working for this College Advising Corps, Camry Ivory. She wrote, "I was drawn to this program because my parents instilled in me the value of a good education, and I believe that everyone should have the opportunity to educate and better themselves." Camry has a very impressive resume. She graduated from Mizzou with a degree in linguistics, and as well as 2 minors, and was involved in a variety of campus organizations. She now goes the extra mile, providing emotional support to her students at Paseo Academy of Fine and Performing Arts in Kansas City, Missouri. And there are several other graduates in this program just as talented and committed as Camry. On the Kansas City campus, the Institute for Urban Education is the first of its kind in the nation, preparing teachers for the unique needs of urban school environments. Besides receiving a bachelor's degree in education, students receive education in issues such as social justice, multicultural learning, and reducing the achievement gap. The third action gets at this issue of accountability and performance. And I do read the papers on occasion, and St. Louis Post recently had an editorial talking about both our strategic directions document as well as some of the challenges facing our state in regards to funding education, funding higher education specifically. And the quote was that really struck me as a higher education system should subject itself to a broad, independent performance audit review without delay. So our response is game on, we got it, and let's go do that. We, in fact, have been about that, as we indicated earlier, establishing for us and for ourselves performance measures and objectives for our campuses. We, in fact, now have, by campus, those performance measures identified and are going about the task of benchmarking best in class, and will be in place objectives against that set of measures, 55 of them, and we intend to audit, as the governor is doing for the state, audit those objectives to be sure that associated with those performance measures I indicated earlier of efficiency, that we can run the gamut across all those measures that are important to our state in research, in human capital development, in service, economic development, and teaching and learning. Those are things that are identified in document, and we intend to use outside support to do this audit, to benchmark against those objectives. And by this time next year, I fully expect to be meeting quarterly with the campuses and with the chancellors to review our performance against those objectives. But the first task will be to audit, are we on the right track, and do we have the right approach? We've talked a lot about economic development, and certainly last year, Chair Walker, and this year, Chairman Frazier, have taken this on again to ensure that we understand, again, our role in the state in regards to economic development. We spent a lot of time in our meetings with the chancellors and with Mike Nichols to understand the importance of creating a mindset where this is a responsibility. This is an opportunity we have that's unique because of our land grant mission in this state to take that research and find those ideas that in fact can be commercialized, that we can have the technology transfer in place. So what I would suggest to you is that we are at that tipping point of being able to go forward, and by setting an objective of a run rate of $50 million a year by 2014, that will cause us to have to do things differently. That will cause us to have to invest, but the benefit culturally to our campuses as we do that. We're going to have to provide resources, have to make this easier than it is today. We know it's hard, and we know that culturally that causes people to retrench as opposed to always bring those good ideas forward, and we have to be sure that we make the investments and remove those roadblocks. But the payoff ought to be clear. We've got examples around this state, and when I go to St. Louis and visit the Center for Emerging Technology, visit our incubation centers, including IT and life sciences, when we see Discovery Ridge, we know the benefit to our state and job creation is there. This type of objective will ensure that we make the investment and pay attention to those opportunities as we look ahead. You know, I have had some experience in business practices, as you all have, and I get asked a lot, well, how do you translate, those business experiences that I had in 36 years and make the university run as a business? Well, that really isn't the point at all. The point is to understand what business practices can, in fact, be applied to this great academic institution. So I've struggled on occasion with this notion of, well, what is the system about? What is the system office about? And is that the vehicle, the best vehicle to centralize and consolidate to get what I would have considered natural efficiencies over time? But I think what's important to me as I've understood the role that our chancellors play and the role that our campuses play, we've got to have a model of shared governance for this to work and for the engagement to take place, and to do that in a way that provides ownership opportunities as we think about that. Shared service concept is not a new concept, but it allows for us to take full advantage across non-core, non-mission activities to find that leverage point, whether it's for purchasing, accounts receivable, and the number of back office transaction processing. My experience, and again, this is widely known in any publication, several universities have undertaken this approach. We know that when you take that collection of functions and put that against shared service center methodology and provide that benefit of processing, that there can be as much as a 20 to 30% savings that occurs over time. Not an easy task. This will be a 5-year approach. It will take us that long to have worked our way through best practices from a process standpoint and best practices from a centralization under the mindset that our chancellors, and by the way, others in higher education, will have a chance to participate. So it will be hard work, but let me give you a couple of examples of demonstrated success. We did take on this a couple of years ago in purchasing. And our purchasing organization has evolved and continues to evolve. And in fact, I just saw a note last week about additional savings that are beginning to occur. But we have found, as a result of that centralization of purchasing, supply chain management, if you will, looking at the whole supply chain from order to delivery, a $31 million cost savings. Pretty big number. We have about $200 million in those spend categories that I listed on that previous chart. So think about the opportunities. If you believe that we have become 14 or 23% more efficient in the past few years, where else are we going to go unless we're willing to consider new models? And I would suggest to you that shared service centers and that concept is a new model. We will go about the hard task of identifying how we make that work, and it will be a journey. Our IT organization, again, consolidated between the system office and MU a couple of years ago, and again, significant savings as we've worked our way through that. You know, it's an interesting time as we think about our role in the state. And I think it's an interesting time as you heard Curator Frazier talk about, you know, the 2 summits that have been planned and our ability to reach out to the state, to the higher education institutions that really rely on each other for those success factors that I talked about earlier. So I think it is time to take advantage of the many successes we've had linking with other community colleges in this state, of linking with the other public four-year institutions in this state. And I want you to know that we are extending to them the opportunity to participate in this outside-in look of looking with our 25 largest employers. I want to be sure that the other four-year institutions in the state and the community colleges have that same perspective that we do, that we're meeting the needs of Missouri companies in regards to the higher education needs that we can provide. We're going to extend that same opportunity to participate in the P20 initiative. What are the actionable things that we can go do that can make a difference to that pipeline? Be that early childhood development, be that K through 12, be that in the community college and higher education articulation agreements. We have to extend that opportunity and reach out. We've done that on both summits. We're going to have full participation from the public institutions that have capability in both energy as well as life sciences. And again, I'm very pleased with the discussion that I've had with Mike Nitzel, who now chairs the statewide Council of the Public Higher Education Institutes. That's a rotating position, as well as the conversations I've had directly with our other four-year and community college colleagues. I think this is a time for the University of Missouri to step up and to take a leadership role in cooperation and collaboration for the benefit of our state, in a very difficult and challenging time. So let me wrap up and say that it's probably pretty common for someone to talk about, gee, this is a critical crossroads. You probably have heard that fairly frequently in these types of speeches, and so I'll grant you that that may be a common theme that you hear. At the same time, I think I have come to understand a very compelling set of facts, and those facts are in regards to the strength of our University of Missouri and what our university means to this state and how we can lever that perhaps in a way that can take our role in the state and make that even more important. I've also come to understand a set of facts in regards to our state's economy in terms of how we are doing in our state in preparing our boys and girls for their next generation and for their preparedness and education. And I think the facts are pretty compelling that we've got work to do there. So my view is that we can and should do more in this period of time and provide leadership both in thought as well as action. We shouldn't be afraid to allow inspection to occur and certainly to allow for new approaches to occur and to consider reforms, if you will, as a way we go about achieving and enhancing our mission in the future. So I think, ladies and gentlemen, we've got a lot to work with. I think it's our opportunity to be proud of that and to ensure that that leverage that we have in this period of time will certainly be enhanced as we take advantage of our position. I want to thank you for the opportunity that was given to me a year ago. I think it's February 18th or so that I crossed that one-year mark. and I look forward to a very exciting year for the University of Missouri and a year that we can provide leadership in this state, which is a position that should be expected by our state to provide, as the last point suggests. Thank you very much.